the name of God, holy and undivided Trinity.
Amen.
I've talked with you a little bit about my gardening experience. I want to give you another sort of vignette about our vegetable garden. We inherited it as having a fence around it, a rather inadequate fence if you want to keep deer out. So I enhanced the fence and put lathwork up. And I sprayed the lathwork with deer repellent. And then we worked in nutrients into the ground, and we created raised beds, and we did, and we did, and we did. And we hooked up a watering system. What more could we have done? And we didn't get any fruit. We had very little in the way of crops this year. Is that right, Jane? I mean, and a lot of it was sort of tasteless. And we're like, oh. And I'm reminded of that because the readings today, and actually our convention yesterday, was wrestling with the fact that you can have a lot built into an institution and very little juice at the center. And that's what was being decried by the prophets, and Jesus was addressing that in the gospel. You know, there's a lot of show that goes on with institutional life, particularly religious life, and it can look like a lot of substance when there ain't substance there. And that was what Jesus was pointing to. That's what the prophets were pointing to, is, beware, of upholding and supporting institutional life like the fence guarantees a garden. I mean, that's not it. We have everything that looks like a garden in our backyard, and this year we said, I think we ought to give it up. Just give it up. Because there was a lot of investment in making sure the fence was good, but what was actually growing inside? And yesterday at convention, that was a lot of what was of the concern. There's an awful lot tied up in making sure that the institution and its property is being maintained. And as we looked around the convention hall, there were a lot of elders. And by that I don't mean only those that are wise, but wise or not, they're aging. And, and the elders were gathered. And so we were wrestling with what that means. And there were statistical analyses being put up about our budgeting forecasts, and they all had to do with a population that in another 10 years is going off a cliff. I mean, it's just, right? Isn't that what we were hearing? It's like, well, and then what? We don't really know. And one forecast says this, and another one says that, and they're wrestling, and it comes out of a certain anxiety because everyone has noted that institutional life in the Episcopal Church is changing. And not all of it's bad, by any means, but the church that I grew up in, maybe the church that some of you grew up in, I don't know, we come from different places, but in my community, the Episcopal Church was one of two on the main green in the center of a New England town, and depending on who was in the pulpit, people would move across the green to one or the other, but everybody knew that going to church was an important social part of living in a community. And it had a cachet to it if you were associated with a congregation that had a certain clout and voice, and you created a social network there that played out into all sorts of other levels of the life of the community, the country club and all sorts of things like that. And that just ain't what that isn't what we're about anymore. And I don't count that as being a bad thing. That isn't why people go. But because people aren't going to church in those numbers and in that way, and because it is no longer assumed that for children to be raised appropriately, they need to be in a church, we've lost a lot of what we counted in my childhood as being just status quo, going on forever. Do you remember those days, anybody here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, Jan was called in to do a talk up in Bristol that had to do with why aren't our young people showing up in church any longer? As if Jan had all the answers for that. I wanted to go and hear the talk. But I got asked to do it first, and I said, I don't know, but I'm sure Jan knows because she's working with young people at the University of Rhode Island. And so I said,
said, she'll have the answer.
And then we had the storm.
And then we had the storm and it got canceled. So anyway, we still don't know. But you know, this wrestling that's going on right now and the shaking of the institution's life is being felt at a lot of quarters more profoundly than it is here, because the structure of this place is so lightweight, you know, and open. And I don't mean just the physical building, but you all. There's an openness and a transparency and sort of a lightness and a vibrancy in terms of how you participate, and all that seemed to come through at the parish meeting. Even though Jan and I weren't there to sort of give our charge to it all, you all had the charge yourselves. You sort of knew what was going on here and how important it was and how vital it was. And, in fact, at the convention, one of the bright spots of convention was to see St. A's highlighted, and the chaplaincy ministry that Jan's been leading and developing being brought forward in the video that's now posted on our website for you all to see. And we heard from the students, some of whom are here. Name the four for me.
Kinte, Abby, Kevin, and Ariana.
All spoke and did a wonderful job, each individually and together. And that was a highlight. That together with Church Beyond the Walls being brought forward in a video form, and then a video about what's going on at ECC. And all of it had to do with populations that the Episcopal Church once took very seriously, but has sort of moved away from and is rediscovering as its mission. Young people and people who have been disenfranchised in our communities. And happily, St. Augustine's embraces both here, that we have a food pantry, we embrace the disenfranchised among our communities, and we embrace LGBTQ, and we embrace students. And all of that seems to be where the fabric of the church is opening up. And the institution, in spite of its losses in so many areas, is rediscovering its vital mission and ministry. And we're in that transition. And you could see the transition in the convention, at least I could feel it. You could sort of hear the shakiness, you know, of trying to adjust to all this financial stuff and all the reporting, and then bleeding through it was this like, oh, wait a minute. In spite of the institution's fragility or implosion in certain areas, life is coming forward. And it's vibrant and new. And you all are riding that wave. It seems to me. And I hope it sounds like you're ready to continue to do that. And to create church in a new and living way. To be church in a new and living way. And that really is what the collect today had to do with, you know, being people of service. Serving this generation, serving the needs that are immediate to who you are and where you are, in ways that are natural to who you are and where you are, not according to some script. And so we keep experimenting here. And I think that's wonderful. We experiment in terms of liturgy, in terms of clergy, participation, team ministries, all of that sort of sometimes amazing and sometimes like bewildering way in which we organize ourselves, the disorganized organization, is just marvelous because of what it yields. It yields something fresh and vibrant. And so then the fence contains something living and juicy, something wonderful. And it's just nourishing, not only for who you are, but for the world in which we dwell. And the bishop pointed to that in his address to say that we need to be juicy, he didn't use these words in mine, but we need to be juicy individuals, rooted and grounded in communion and in the scriptures, so that we have an answer for a community that is divided and failing out and around us. And so we need to be united in Christ with one another, nurtured in Christ, so that we can be a nurturing presence in the world. So, by God's grace, that'll be a continuing theme here at St. A's. And just sort of feel into the beam, because God is doing a new thing in our midst. not only here, but in the church, universal, in the Episcopal Church, I trust and hope, because it's happening here. So I hope it serves to be yeast for the whole loaf. So God bless you all. I was glad to hear a happy report about the parish meeting. We're on our way, and God bless us, everyone. Amen.
Amen.